Our whole experience in the Philippines in 1990 was one of the most incredible I've ever had. It was a hard time. It was a scary time. But it was a time that God built into my life and the life of our staff a faith that we had never experienced before. Campus Crusade was planning a large outreach in Manila in the Philippines. So we thought, what's the best way to reach out in Manila? Well, that's to go into the high schools. And they agreed to allow us to bring in 400 high school students in small groups to the different high schools all across the city of Manila. And I was the first one in. I went on the first plane, and as I arrived, they handed me these Xerox sheets. And the sheets had pictures of people who had been murdered and killed in the Philippines by the leftists. And there was big writing saying, we know why you're here as Americans, and if you stay, this is what's going to happen to you. And it showed people who had been killed. And the State Department put out a warning that Americans should not travel into the Philippines because of it. Well, we were at a point of crisis. What would we do? So the parents were back in the United States praying over this. What are they going to do? The kids were in flight coming from the U.S. So we began to pray and say, Lord, what would you have us do? And so we came up with a plan. The plan was the parents would let us know who could stay and who wouldn't. And it ended up that some went to Hong Kong, some went to the islands and began to share Christ there. We sent some to Singapore, and they opened the high school ministry in Singapore. And so for the next month and a half, we were reaching out all across Asia, plus the 140 of us who stayed in Manila were still able to get out and get to every high school to share Christ with all the students that we wanted to share Christ with. And that was about over 120,000 students. And of that number, we saw over 40,000 indicate that they had put their faith in Jesus Christ that summer. Day after day, we'd get in those jeepneys and go out to those schools with our teams. And when the monsoons came, we'd stand in water up to our ankles in some of those classrooms, talking about the Lord, and kids would just hang on every word. In some cases, the teacher would say, well, keep going, keep going. So we'd use the entire class period. About halfway through the 40 days that we were in Manila, an earthquake hit, a huge earthquake. And right before that earthquake hit, the newspapers came out with some very negative articles about what Campus Crusade was doing in the city. And we thought, this is just a matter of time, they're going to shut us out of the schools. And then that earthquake hit. And when it hit, that became the news, and everything else was really forgotten about. And also, when the earthquake hit, they had to close down the schools because they had to check them for any damage in structure. So we'd go out to the schools anyway, and the kids didn't have class, but they'd all come to the campus. So we would go and just set up, and kids would gather. We'd share the gospel, we'd get them into groups, we'd do follow-up. At the end of the summer, the teams from Singapore and Hong Kong came together. We met back in Manila. We had a great celebration, sharing what God had done, and it reminded us of the book of Acts, where persecution came upon the Christians and then they spread, and they were really running for their lives, which we weren't running for our lives, but as they ran, they spread the gospel throughout the world of that time. And as we had to disperse, we were able to spread the gospel to teenagers all through Asia. That was an incredible experience for our entire team, and one that built our faith. I think of all the things that I've experienced, that was probably really the greatest in terms of my faith growing. And I've often used this to encourage others who are going through a rough time in ministry, a risky time in ministry, a time when you're not sure what to do. And I've used that in my ministry many times since then, when I face hard decisions, difficult circumstances. Just to remember God's faithfulness in Manila. It was a life-changing experience.